Okay, I can record. All right. Okay. So, and here is the issue here. What Marx thought is that the economic system is defined based on who owns the means of production. That's the main theory he came up with. Now, under this categorization, you don't see the economic system of Islam, although the economic system of Islam existed during this period. So if I will open another slide and focus here on this part. So according to Marx, I would say Islamic economic system either did not exist or it must fit the feudalist system, or its theory is incomplete. So that's usually our argument, is in according to Marx, the before capitalism, the only thing that existed for a long time before, throughout the medieval years, which is stretches all the way to Islamic era, he thinks it was only feudalist, and the land ownership defines the defines who owns. I mean, what type of system exists. In through the Islamic system, we say, look, you cannot explain the Islamic economic system, all of it based on feudalism. It's impossible, because Islam came up with laws and regulations for money that have to do with a gold system, has to do with partnerships, has to do with ownership, which is not totally based on land ownership. And then Islam did have other forms of wealth distribution, which does not depend on who owns the land, because the land was allowed for regular people to own the land, and the transfer of land was very simple in Islam. So that's one of the biggest flaws in Marxist theory, is when you see that there existed an economic system which is totally different from the feudalist system, which did exist in Europe. Feudalism did exist in Europe, actually. But throughout the Islamic world, or the Muslim world governed by Islam, feudalism faded away and slavery faded away. So Islam came and freed slaves instead of gaining slavery or increasing them. Did not allow, for example, there is this hadith which is very interesting. The hadith says, whoever owns a land shall cultivate it himself or give it away to another, actually to his brother, says to a brother. Now, brother here does not mean kin brother, it means Islamic brother. And by the same token, Islam prohibited leasing a land. Lease means the ijara, leasing a land for cultivation. Let's say if I have a very large land and I cannot cultivate it and take care of it myself, I will not be able to lease it to someone so he can, let's say, take part of the crops. Even if he takes half of it, or 3/4 or 90%, and gives me 10%, it's not allowed. So it says, you cannot, this type of land lease is not allowed. So, and land sharing is not allowed. So you either do it yourself or give it to someone else. So that defies feudalism altogether. So that's in fact, we used to have this point, is the very critical point in refuting Marxist theory about the economy. Although, to be fair, it's a very intelligent way that Marx did, because he found one principle, and based on that principle, he was able to define 7 segments in the history of mankind for economic orders, starting from the disorder, the hunting era, the animals, or what we call it, the Bedouins who just wander around in their lands, and then the feudalism, then capitalism, then socialism. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then, of course, there's communism on top of that. That makes it 7, because he distinguishes between communism and socialism. And his major flaw had been, of course, in well, there are major other flaws, but the practical one, the real practical one, is the existence of the economic system, Islamic economic system. That was the major blow to his theory, at least from our perspective. Okay, so that's said. Here, I want to move to the other issue, which is the objectives of the economy and what's the economic problem. Do we have any questions here or comments before I proceed on those issues that we just...
No.
Okay.
It's clear.
All right. Okay. Now, when we say what is the economic problem, actually, whenever we talk about a system, any system, so we can always say any system is a collection of rules, if you will, regulations, practices, combined all together, solves a given problem. And that goes for any complex system. Any complex system, like what a computer will do. A computer has so many devices. It has electronics, it has screen, it has mouse, it has keyboard, it has processor, it has memory. All of it is to solve a numerical problem, which means to compute numbers, to crunch numbers. And from those numbers, you can do all types of things. So that's a system designed to be able to process numbers according at a certain speed, fast, very fast, extra fast, super fast, and so on. That's what a system is. A system, an irrigation system, for example, for in the plants, irrigation system, for example, here, let me see. What's irrigation system? Irrigation system, you have water supply, pipes, auto control, and other devices. What's the problem? To be able to provide water to the plants as needed. So that's the problem we solve. We have to solve a problem. Every system must solve a problem. Otherwise, it's not a system, or it's a toy. Can be complex, but it's a toy. So if you can collect so many devices, put them together, collect so many bricks, put them together, this will not be called a home until and unless they are built in a certain manner so that people can use it to live in. That's a system. Another system I would say here, like house. It's a system. It's let's say there are pillars, ceiling, floor, walls, sewage. How do you call sewage? I think not like this. Water, bathrooms, all to enable people to live. So that's what a system. So when we talk about economic system, the question comes, what is the problem which needs to be solved by the economic system? That's when we talk about economic system, the question is, what is the problem? So you define the system. So according to in socialism, define the economic problem is the ownership of means of productions. That is the problem. The problem is who owns the means of production. And that's the problem they wanted to solve, because they thought whoever depends on who owns the means of production, that's how the problem is solved. And in this case, they viewed the society or the society as one indivisible unit. So the whole society we look at it as one unit called the society, and the society moves as one material object or stops as a material object. So that was the problem which they solved or they wanted to solve. And that's why under socialism, they had the nationalization of all the means of products. All the factories belong to the state, all the land belongs to the state, all the irrigation system belonged to the state, all the big farms, cattle, sheep, cows belong to the state. And they say the state represents the collective people. So that's the issue under what the socialists they solved. Under capitalism, here, under capitalism, they said our problem is the well-being of the society. So they said in the economic problem, and that's the reason, that's the reason for this, because capitalist theorists in general, they did not distinguish between the economic system and the economy in general. So they they thought that the economy is really, or the economic system problem is in the growth of the economy, and that's what they tended to solve. And here they said, okay, the well-being of the society, which means society cannot be poor. So they invented the term societal poverty. Not individual poverty, but societal poverty. That's why today, if we, so let me take one more slide here and go focus on capitalism today. They started talking about the when if the economic growth is negative, for example, or too low, then they declare an economic crisis which needs to be addressed. And they invented the index, which has to do what they call it the I think what they call the economic, I think it's called the economic growth. Oh, I'm sorry. Index GDP, that's what I wanted to say. The gross national product, or GNP, which is called the gross. This is
gross GDP, domestic, gross
domestic.
Yeah, domestic product. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And this is the gross national product. Yes. So those are the indexes they invented to measure. Those ones measure the health status of the society. So based on that, if GDP slash or GNP is low, it means the society is poor, let's say, or not healthy. If GDP slash GNP is high, the society is doing well and healthy. Now, what is the GDP? GDP or GNP, this is the sum of all productions, money exchanges, in a given society. Okay. So the sum of all productions. For example, in the US, this will be the total productions of car industry, oil, electronics, software like Microsoft, Apple, etc., Google, banks, insurance companies, and so on. So that's why Sometimes today, the US GDP stands at more than $20 trillion per year. Okay, so now based on that, if you think about what does this $20 trillion means, let's say US population roughly 300 million people. I think it's a bit more. So the average income per individual, you have to divide 30 trillion, which is 30 times 10 to the power 12, divided by 300 million, 3 times 10 to the power 8, I think. That's 300 million, yes, 300 million, million 6, yes, which is equal, if you divide this, it will be 10 times 10 to the power 4, which is 10 times 10 to the power 5, actually, which is equal $100,000. That's the average income per individual per year, $100,000, which is not true. So this means that every person in the country gets $100,000 per year if the total or maybe less than that. Also, let's say I think 30 trillion is not a far-fetched number. So as an approximately, that's what the capitalism says. Now, which means if this is the case, this means that no individual in the US is poor, because poverty line is around, let's say, I think it's about $25,000 or $20,000 per year. Anyone who earns, actually in reality it's 15,000, because if you earn less than $15,000, you don't pay taxes. That's the definition, their definition. If you own more than $15,000, then you are okay. But in reality, it's, but the idea here is the difference between 100,000 and 15,000 is very large, which is 85,000. So there are $85,000 supposed to be in the hands of each individual, but they don't have those. Why? Because in America, the rate of poor people whose income is below poverty line is about 20% of the population. So 20% are poor based on US statistics, which means 20% out of 300 million, that's 60 million people, which is about 60 million people should have what we call it the extra $85,000. But they don't. That is the real problem of capitalism. Capitalism looks at the society, they say the society is good, okay. If the society is good, they also claim, by the way, they claim if the GDP is high, then the money will find its way naturally in the same manner that we were able to collect this $30 trillion. The money will find its way to every individual based on the needs of an individual, based on the incentives that the person needs to get part of his money. But nevertheless, over time, and that's their false claim by Smith and Ricardo. Their theory is let the society generates XXX money, okay? This is a sign of healthy society, okay? Now the question is, how do people get their share of the money? The answer, the relative scarcity, which we talked about earlier, the relative scarcity, or what we call the التنشيط النيريتكست, relative scarcity is responsible over time. They say, give me enough time, over time, to distribute the wealth to all those who need it using one mechanism, which they call that mechanism the price mechanism. Which means what they say, that means price the products correctly based on the ability of people to pay and the need of the people for the product. Eventually, what they say, eventually, now how they left it to the time, which we call it escape to time, like many people do. They say eventually every person should get enough of the products to satisfy his or her need. That's exactly what they say, which means, what really that means is, look, they say, we are going to produce $10 million worth of potatoes or rice, okay? And we have about 10,000 people. 10,000 people. Now, at one point of time, we produced the $10 million worth of potatoes. Bingo, good. We've done that. All right. Now, how do you guarantee? The number one, we say we achieved our objective. We solved our problem. Our quota is $10 million worth of potatoes. We have it. We have enough land. We have enough machines. We were able to produce that. So the question is, how can you guarantee that the 10,000 people, each and every one of them is going to get part of this potatoes for that month or that year? Let's say everybody's need is at least, let's say, 10 kilograms per month, and per year that's about 100 kilograms. How do you guarantee that I will get 100 kilograms? You say, okay, that's simple. You work your everything, your as much as you can, get some money. If you don't get enough money, and the 10,000 people don't have enough money to buy the potatoes, then the merchant, the big merchant, the landlord who produced the potatoes will be forced to reduce the price. So the price will be reduced because there is a demand, but there is not enough buying power. So you have to reduce your price. And when you reduce your price, so people are going to get their share, which means they will be able to get part of that share. And then when they start getting their share, so they have part of the wealth in their hand, which some of them will sell it for some other people. The landlord now sees that the people now can afford to pay more for the potatoes, then he raises the price. Raise the price, then some people will suffer. And the price will fluctuate up and down until it settles to a point where everybody can afford to get his share. How long this process does it take? The question, how long the process takes to settle down to a fair distribution? Answer, is no limit, which is actually, as we say it in math, we say as t goes to infinity, we usually have a curve like this, and that's what the Smith-Ricardo, this is time, which is as t this way goes to infinity. Let me be a little bit nasty here and do some math. لا شكرا والله أنس. مش هسه لما أخلص. So this as t time goes to infinity, and here we start with something very high, which is that's our current GDP. It keeps going like this,